One. Okay. We're live now. Everybody, welcome back. We are just here with a special scholar of ours. Of course, we are talking about Dr. James C. VanderKam. C is for clear, right, Dr. VanderKam? Am I right?
Correct.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, everyone, I know you've been I received some messages from you guys just to make sure because you wanted to be in this interview for because of the figure who is accompanying today. I understand that. I'm excited too. I'm sure my co-hosts they are too. So, Joshua, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. Do you hear me? I hear you well. You hear me well?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. We can all hear you pretty well.
Great. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I was really excited to meet face to face, at least in virtual way, the Dr. James VanderKam. I know his name because it appears everywhere in my books. So I'm very happy, and I'm really happy that we're gonna have this conversation.
I'm pretty sure you are. Matthias, Dr. VanderKam, Matthias is from Russia. How about that?
How about, yes. My goodness.
Yeah. Matthias, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for the invitation. I finally will have the opportunity to ask Dr. VanderKam all the doubts I have about his work, all the questions I have. So, well, not all, obviously, but at least some.
I know you have existential doubts, Matthias, just like me. But gladly we have the man here to go over those questions, definitely. So, guys, it's an honor for you, for me, to have you both. Yeah. Joshua, go ahead. You were about to say something.
No, I say we are everyone is far away, right?
I mean, Dr. VanderKam, he is in the States. I am in Honduras. If Dr. VanderKam has no idea where Honduras is located, I won't blame him.
I know where it is.
Thank you, sir. That's an honor. So Joshua, you have multiple locations. I'm not sure where you are at now. I mean,
right
he can say it by himself.
Right. No, it's fine. Right now, I'm in Lisbon. In couple days, it's true what Marv is saying, Dr. VanderKam. I'm in Lisbon right now, but in couple days I will be going to Chicago, to the United States, to visit my father. And I'm currently studying in Edinburgh's Theological Seminary in Scotland. So,
oh my goodness,
always, yes. So I'm always going and coming. I actually live in Scotland. I'm here by seasons.
Yeah, there you have it, people. Matthias is also studying. Matthias, could you tell us just a little bit here to Dr. VanderKam where you're studying? How are you doing there in your studies?
Well, currently I'm living in St. Petersburg, Russia. I'm from Chile, in South America. And I'm now in the Christian theology program in St. Petersburg State University. And I'm working now in the thesis, and it's related to astronomical objects, how to theological interpretation of astronomical objects during basically the Second Temple period. And my background before I got into the theology program was astronomy, which is the science of astronomy. So that's why I have that interest.
Very good.
So Dr. VanderKam, as you can see, Matthias will pretty much get along with Enoch with the astronomy thing and everything. Yeah, you know. Right. Okay, everyone ready? So, here we have Aitor Navarro. Saludos. With your permission, Dr. VanderKam, I'm going to say in Spanish. Saludos, Aitor. ¿Cómo estás? Si tienes preguntas, puedes dejarlas ahí, ya sabes, en los comentarios. Okay, let's hit the intro, and then we're gonna go into the questions and have fun. So stay there, and we're gonna hit the intro right away. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Welcome back to your Verano 1711 podcast. This is your host, of course, Marv, coming to you from Honduras. Today we have a special, super, yes. I'm going to add the Trisagion right there. Super special guest. I'm referring, of course, to Dr. James C. VanderKam. Dr. VanderKam, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Pleasure to have you here. Today, Dr. VanderKam affectionately is called our Jubilee guy. Dr. VanderKam has written extensively on the Book of Jubilees, and we are going to be asking him all the questions possible. I already provided him previously, and we're going to have fun here, just knowing a little bit more about this literature, which is important, really important in the Second Temple literature and everything. Today, also, I am joined by two co-hosts, special friends of mine. They are my partners in crime. Of course, I'm referring to Joshua and Matthias. Joshua, I'm going to go with you first. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very good. I'm very happy, and actually quite nervous because I have to do a lot of stuff before I take the flight. But I'm fine. I'm happy because, as I tell before to the Dr. James, I'm very into apocryphal works. So this is something I really like. So I hope to be, I don't know. I hope I will learn something. Well, we can learn a lot in this case.
Yeah, that's the attitude. Okay. Matthias, my friend, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing fine, all things considered. Oh, but great. I'm great. I'm doing great because of that opportunity. This opportunity.
My pleasure, guys. My pleasure. Okay, so let's get into things. We have some comments here. Sergio Ramirez, greetings, brother. I will try to understand everything. I'm still learning English. Oh, that's great. Sergio, just so you know, at the end, you need to wait a couple of, I think it's 1 or 2 hours once the interview it's in YouTube. I have the subtitles. I have activated the subtitles for you guys who can't read or speak in English. No worries. We got that covered. Okay, so you can have it on your own language. So thank you for letting us know that. Okay, Dr. VanderKam, before we go into the questions, I need to ask you this. How did you end up doing biblical studies, tangle up in all of this? Please just give us a bit of a background right there.
Okay, well, my father was a pastor.
Okay.
And so I naturally was interested in these sorts of things and what he did, and learning from him at church and in catechism classes and so on. Although I found that even though I heard the Bible often and read the Bible often as I was growing up, I really became interested in studying it when I began studying languages, studying Greek and Hebrew. Once I was able to read those languages, it became much more interesting to study the Bible. And my father had actually taught me the Greek and Hebrew alphabets when I was a little boy. So I had a little bit of a head start there since he had studied those languages.
Yeah.
But then I continued to study those languages in college and seminary, and of course in graduate school. But the languages and the history really caught my attention, my interest.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, and also the reason I'm asking this to you because it has to do, I am assuming, with passion. I remember my mentor, the late Michael Heiser. He was asked the same thing. He was doing a lecture on Gnosticism, and someone from the audience, when they were on lunch, this person approached him and said, "Dr. Heiser, do you know that you could be doing lots of money instead of being lecturing?" Right? Why are you doing that? And he said, "Well, this is what we love. This is our passion, and it's something that I understand from you as well, Dr. VanderKam. Thank you for that." So let's go with the first questions, guys. Joshua and Matthias, regarding your questions, I'm gonna drop the first five. okay? And then I will give you the space for you to ask your personal questions to Dr. VanderKam, okay? Just to give you the heads up right there. Okay, let's go with the first question. Dr. VanderKam, tell us in broad strokes, what is the Book of Jubilees, its manuscript, its theology, its relation to Genesis and Exodus, and its influence on later literature?
Okay, that's a very big question, so let me try to answer that.
Sure.
The Book of Jubilees is a book that really retells the stories from Genesis 1 until about Exodus 24. So it is a rewritten version of those parts of the books of Genesis and Exodus. It was written at a time later than the books of Genesis and Exodus. So the writer, I believe, had those books in front of him as he wrote, and he wanted to offer his understanding of the material in those books. The book adopts the setting of Moses on Mount Sinai. Israel has reached Mount Sinai in the wilderness, and Moses goes up to the mountain, according to Exodus 24, for his first 40-day stay on the mountain. And that's where the writer of Jubilees sets his book, with Moses on Mount Sinai and meeting with God there. And so Jubilees is a retelling of the stories from Genesis 1 to this point in Exodus 24, but it puts an introduction to it. The first chapter of Jubilees is an introduction in which God and Moses are speaking. And we have to remember that just the day before, the covenant had been made at Mount Sinai. So Israel and God were in covenant. And as God speaks to Moses, he predicts to Moses that the people are going to stray from the covenant. They will not stay faithful to it. And he provides a summary of the subsequent history of Israel to Moses. And Moses intercedes, steps in after God makes these predictions and says, well, don't do that. Don't let that happen. Change Israel's heart so that they don't stray from your ways. And God says, no, that's the way it's going to happen until they repent and return, and then I will be with them forever. So Jubilees is kind of a Bible with an introduction. So introduction to the first two books of the Bible. And as the writer does not reproduce everything in Genesis and Exodus, he omits some material, especially when he gets to the book of Exodus. He's a bit briefer there. He moves his story along more quickly. But he also adds some material to Genesis and in some places to Exodus, and he revises in some ways. And I like to think of Jubilees as a commentary on those books in the Bible, that a commentary that reveals to us what are some of the things that worried early readers of Genesis. What are some things in the text of Genesis and Exodus that bothered these readers? For example, when one of the major characters in Genesis, like Abraham, lies about who his relationship to his wife, claiming she's his sister. Obviously, this was bothersome to people. You know, why would this great hero Abraham lie about things? Jubilees deals with some kinds of questions like that arose in people's minds about the characters in the book. Jubilees, incidentally, is, as far as I know, the first book that says that Moses wrote the material in Genesis and in Exodus. Now, I mentioned that Jubilees was written in Hebrew. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, this was generally understood to be the case, that Jubilees was a Hebrew composition, even though for centuries we did not have a Hebrew copy of it. But among the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments, and I stress fragments, of 14 different copies of Jubilees have been identified. They're all very broken up, but there is a decent amount of text that has been preserved in the Hebrew language. All of those copies from the Dead Sea Scrolls are in Hebrew. Especially for the first 2 chapters of the book, we have quite a bit of material preserved, and in a few other places. Now, Jubilees, as we know, was at some time translated from Hebrew into Greek. We don't have a copy of that translation, nor do we know exactly when it happened, but it did. And we know this because of some reflections of the Greek translation and also other translations made from it. For the Greek translation of Jubilees, we have a few cases where early Christian writers quoted from it. Epiphanius is one of them who quoted a few passages from Jubilees, and there are some other writers. Apparently Jerome knew about Jubilees. The people who wrote in Greek and used the text of Jubilees the most were some Byzantine chronographers, Byzantine writers who wrote histories of the world. And they often used material from Jubilees to fill in gaps that Genesis didn't talk about in as much detail. So we know that Greek translation of Jubilees in quotations and allusions to it in Christian literature. We also know that, we have good reason for thinking Jubilees was translated probably from Greek into the Syriac language. The Syriac language was one of the important ones in early Christianity, and Jubilees was translated into that. We have one manuscript in which there are a number of citations from Jubilees preserved in Syriac. Jubilees was translated from Greek into Latin as well. And we do have a partial copy of that translation. Apparently the translation was made in the 5th or 6th centuries AD. We have one manuscript that preserves about a third of that translation of the book into Latin. And unfortunately, the manuscript is a palimpsest. That is, the Jubilees translation was written on it, and later that manuscript was reused and tried to erase the translation of Jubilees and wrote a Christian text over it. But parts of the Jubilees translation into Latin can be read. And in fact, a former student of mine is heading up a project in which the very latest photographic techniques are being used to read this manuscript, so that more can be read now than ever could be before. And finally, Jubilees was translated from Greek into Ethiopic, the Ethiopic language, the traditional language of the Ethiopic Orthodox Church. The whole book was translated into Ethiopic, and we have quite a few manuscripts now of the Book of Jubilees in Ethiopic, complete manuscripts. And the book was preserved in the Ethiopian church and actually among the Jews of Ethiopia because it was considered canonical by the Christians, part of the Old Testament. So they had reason to preserve it, and we have many copies of that. So Jubilees theology, a few things stand out to me. One is that the writer has, we might say, a deterministic approach. He believed that God had worked out everything in advance, and that everything that was going to happen was decided by God from the beginning, and in fact was written down on heavenly tablets. Heavenly tablets are a very important topic in the Book of Jubilees. The in the first chapter of the book, the introductory chapter, God tells an angel of the presence, one of these angels who serve in God's presence, to dictate to Moses from the heavenly tablets the contents of the book of Jubilees, the contents of everything after the introductory chapter. So apparently all that material is written on the heavenly tablets, and we find out later in the book of Jubilees that many laws are written on these tablets. It's the heavenly tablets have all kinds of important information on them. And Jubilees is supposed to be a transcription, a dictated transcription of material on the heavenly tablets. So this is a kind of authority conferring strategy by the author of Jubilees. The contents of his book are said to be written on the heavenly tablets. The highest ranking angel dictates those contents to the most reliable human being, Moses, and he writes it down. So the contents of the book of Jubilees are presented as being very, very reliable. Another feature of Jubilees that really stands out and makes it sound different than Genesis and Exodus is that, especially different than Genesis, is that laws, many laws are mentioned in the book of Jubilees, that laws that we know from the Bible, we know them from Moses' law, but some of them are read back into the time of the patriarchs and even to the times of the most ancient people in the Bible, like Adam and Eve. So one important point that the writer is making that's different than Genesis is that some of God's laws were revealed already from the very beginning. They were revealed, the Sabbath, for example, in all its details was revealed. And the festivals, Israel's important festivals, were already practiced by the patriarchs. Genesis does reveal some laws, like the law of circumcision that was given to Abraham when Isaac was born, but it doesn't have very many of them. Jubilees has quite a few, and it's obviously important to the author to indicate that these ancestors of the nation Israel obeyed many of the laws of Moses. They were revealed actually at an earlier time. Another feature that stands out in Jubilees is the election of Israel. Israel was chosen from the beginning. God already from the beginning chose Jacob and his offspring, the children of Jacob or the children of Israel. As Jubilees tells the creation story, it talks about what God made on the first 6 days, of course, as in Genesis 1. But then when it gets to the 7th day, or at the end of the creation process, the writer says that God made 22 works of creation, 22 altogether, and then he rested on the Sabbath day. And Sabbath laws are given at that point to indicate that God, the angels, and Israel are ones who celebrate the Sabbath. But the author adds at that point that not only were there 22 works of creation followed by the Sabbath, but also that there were 22 generations of human beings followed by Jacob. So that Jacob, like the Sabbath, follows 22 items. So that Jacob and the Sabbath, or Jacob and Israel and the Sabbath, are joined together already from the beginning. The very structure of the genealogy that led to Jacob, the very structure of the universe that leads to the Sabbath, all of these are joined together by the author of the book of Jubilees. Not only was Israel and Jacob chosen from the beginning, and it's obvious throughout the book of Jubilees that Jacob is the author's hero, but we also learn in Jubilees that the land of Israel was given to Israel at the time when the world was divided just after the flood. according to Jubilees, after the flood, Noah divided the whole world between his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and gave each of them a large portion of the world to settle, and they gave it to their children and so on. But Shem, who is the son of Noah, through whom the genealogy in the Bible is traced, Shem is the one who receives the whole area that includes the land of Israel. And we learn in that story that Canaan, who is a son of Ham, a descendant of Ham, that Canaan refused to accept the territory assigned to him somewhere in North Africa and decided to settle in the land that we call Canaan, or that's called Canaan in the Bible. He stole it, in other words, and it was only right that later on, when Israel arrived at the borders of Canaan, that they took it back. It had been stolen from their ancestors, and now Israel rightfully took it back. This is an attempt to justify the conquest of Canaan that we find in the Bible, in the book of Joshua. And if I can just say one more thing about Jubilees,
Sure.
And how it stands out from Genesis, Jubilees gives a prominent role to women. And this has made the book attractive to quite a number of modern scholars, of course.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Women play a large role in it. And I think it was not because the author was a feminist before his time. He had another motivation. The author of Jubilees was very concerned to show that the genealogical line that led to Jacob was a pure line, that there was no admixture of other races into that line. And so he very carefully points out for each member of this genealogy the identity of his wife and what her parentage was and so on, so that always we can tell that someone in the chosen line, from Adam to Seth and so on down the line, all of them married properly. That is, their parents were from the proper families and so on. Any exceptions led to hard times. But for all the sons of Jacob, too, their wives are named, and just in an attempt to show that this line has been preserved purely. And the leading woman in the book is Rebekah, Jacob's mother. And Genesis, of course, says she loved Jacob and her husband Isaac loved Esau, so that she was the more perceptive of the two. She realized who was the better son right from the beginning. So she has a very close relationship with Jacob in Jubilees, a more expanded relationship with him than we find in the book of Genesis. So let me just stop there in attempting to talk about the book. As for influence on later literature, Jubilees certainly had its influence. I suspect not as large of an influence as parts of the Book of Enoch had later on, but it had its influence. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can point to several cases where documents appear to have been influenced by Jubilees. One is explicit. The Damascus document, one of the most important legal texts among the scrolls, refers to Jubilees by name, by the name Jubilees gives itself, and says that the times of Israel's sinning are defined precisely in the book of Jubilees. It calls it the book of the divisions of the times, which is the name Jubilees gives itself. There are a couple of texts that have been called pseudo-Jubilees. They sort of rework parts of Jubilees. We may have a reference to Jubilees as an authoritative text in another work from Qumran. We do know that the calendar that Jubilees espouses, the 364-day calendar. This was one that the community of the Dead Sea Scrolls used for their festivals. So, and it's also found, of course, in the astronomical book of Enoch. So Jubilees did have its influence on the literature of the Dead Sea Scrolls. After that, it's somewhat more difficult to prove. There's no clear indication that Jubilees influenced anything in the New Testament. There are some possibilities. I've been struck by the parallels that we find between how Jubilees talks about the Festival of Weeks, that is Pentecost, which is the covenant festival in Jubilees, and the story of Pentecost in Acts 2 and subsequent chapters. There are a number of parallels there that in the way the story in Acts, the story of the giving out of the Spirit, the way that is described, I don't know if Jubilees had any influence on the writer in that regard or not. I've mentioned already that some early Christian writers cited Jubilees, even though we don't have a complete copy of the book in the Greek language. There are some Jewish texts that also show knowledge of Jubilees, some Midrashic texts. Actually, the unusual creation story in Jubilees is reproduced in later Hebrew texts. So there are several references of that sort, but not a lot of indication of influence in Jewish circles. Okay.
All right, thank you, Dr. VanderKam. I mean, guys, I'm trying to to follow suit these answers. I mean, my first encounter with the book of Jubilees, my first, what do you call it? My first impression was whoever this guy or these guys were, they're trying like filling in the gaps because they were adding some different twists to the stories that I've been taught ever since Sunday school.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's something very prominent that I noted in my first encounter with the Book of Jubilees.
Mm-hmm.
It caught my attention that you said the Sabbath laws,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean the very fact that the book is called Jubilees, that should ring a bell in us. I mean, why even go with that title? It's because that's intentional on part of the author. Is sending a message right there to the audience. That's something that really caught my attention as well. The other thing you said about the woman, I trust me, I'm not lying. I didn't know that. That's new to me, and I'm pretty sure Joshua and Matthias, I don't know about them, but for me, I have never heard of that until now. So that's something new to take away from here. Okay, let's move on to the second question, Dr. VanderKam, if you don't mind. So, guys, Joshua, Matthias, any comments so far? Let me know. Oh, Joshua, I can hear you. You're muted.
I mean, the Book of Jubilees at the side of Enoch, first of Enoch, it have been very, very interesting for me. And I see the same as you say. It fills the gaps. For sometimes you need to, you know that probably because of the sources of Genesis, it looks like it's like jumping between, and some spaces are not totally clear. So it looks like Jubilees is taking care of that. So it's very interesting, actually.
Yeah, that's right. It does.
Yeah. Matthias, any comments?
Not any comments especially, but all this literature, it sounds to me like Bible, Old Testament fan fiction.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It looks like
I know some who would say that.
yeah, but it's like a model of how to understand it. It could be like people do fan fiction about a series that they love, and it basically is kind of like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something
mean,
I can say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something I can say about this second question. It's not one of my questions, but it could be nice if Dr. VanderKam could tell us a bit about this different version of Jubilees between the sacrifice of Isaac, because it's very interesting in the book of Jubilees. It changed.
Yeah. Definitely. So yeah, Dr. VanderKam, second question would be, can you give us a couple of examples where Jubilees tell stories found in Genesis and Exodus with a different twist in the narrative?
Right. Well, sure. Maybe we could take up the one Joshua just mentioned first.
Yes, please.
The story of the near sacrifice of Isaac. The story that is pretty remarkable in Genesis, of God telling Abraham to take this beloved son of his, the only son of Sarah and himself, the one who fulfills the promise that has been given, and so surprisingly fills the promise after his parents are so aged. God tells him, kill him, and that he's to go up to this mountain and to sacrifice him there. So Abraham just goes, like he's obedient. He does what God tells him to do, and gets ready to sacrifice his son. And of course, as we know, he's stopped at the last moment. And the story has, of course, horrified people for a long time, and people tried to explain it in various ways. But Jubilees gives us perhaps our earliest explanation of it. According to Jubilees, the whole situation was set up differently than is said explicitly in Genesis. According to Jubilees, Mastema, I guess we'll talk about him later, this leader of the evil spirits, questions God about Abraham's faithfulness. He calls it into question, and he says, do you think that Abraham, pretty much, does Abraham serve you for nothing? In other words, does Abraham really serve you? Does he love you best, or does he love his son more than he loves you? So he asks a question like this. And naturally, anyone who knows the Bible will recognize this as coming from the framework of the book of Job, where the Satan is in the heavenly council, and he raises questions about why Job is faithful to God. Is it because he loves Job, so Job loves God so much, or is it because God gives him everything, makes him so wealthy, and every aspect of his life is wonderful? So Mastema does that kind of Job question, raises questions before God. So the result of this is God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. And the purpose of his doing that is not because God wants him to kill his son, that God approves of child sacrifice or anything like that. God wants to show to Mastema that Abraham is indeed faithful in all that God tells him to do. So that gives a whole different perspective on the sacrifice of Isaac's story. It continues in Jubilees in much the way it does in Genesis, with Abraham and Isaac going off to the mountain that God would show them. And they arrive there on the third day, and Abraham builds an altar and so on. Isaac raises his question. This is starting to look suspicious to him, but the near sacrifice is stopped, as it is in the Bible. And an angel of the presence is involved in mediating this whole matter. And the end of the story is that Mastema is put to shame because God has proved to him that Abraham is faithful in everything that God commands him, even so far as to sacrificing his own son. So he has proved this point to Mastema. So the whole story is presented in a different framework in Jubilees. And one interesting little sidelight that Jubilees adds to this is it names the mountain on which Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. It's Mount Moriah, which is the place where the temple was built later on, so that Isaac was nearly sacrificed at the place where the temple altar will later be. And Jubilees also is careful to date this event, as it is with so many events. It dates them precisely in its calendar. And it turns out that the sacrifice of Isaac, the near sacrifice of Isaac, takes place when the Passover lamb is to be sacrificed. And so that the near sacrifice of Isaac becomes kind of a forerunner of the Passover in Jubilees. So that's one example of where a story in Genesis is retold in Jubilees, but it comes out looking quite a bit different. I can mention a couple of others that maybe are not quite so broad and interesting as these, but they illustrate some of the concerns of the author. Let me mention this one about Adam. In Genesis, when God gives the first commandment to the man, in Genesis 2, he says, you can eat the fruit of all the trees in the garden, but not this one, not one. Don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because on the day that you eat of it, you will die. Well, this obviously troubles readers of Genesis, because we know well that the first couple ate the fruit and did not die on the day they ate the fruit. God says, on the day you eat it, you will die. They didn't. So what's going on here? Does God not know this? Is God not telling the truth? You know, obviously these are unacceptable conclusions to draw from the story. So the way Jubilees handles it is that he, with Genesis, says that Adam died at the age of 930. And then he refers to Psalm 90, which says that a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. So he says, when God uses the word day there in Genesis 2:17 and says, on the day that you eat of it, you will die, he's thinking of a day as 1,000-year period. And Adam died at the age of 930, so he didn't make it to 1,000. Hence, he died on the day in which he transgressed God's commandment. And actually, we find this kind of thing referred to in the New Testament as well. This was one way of explaining that problem in Genesis that might not be everybody's favorite explanation of it, but it was an attempt to do so. One place where Jubilees gives another story in a different way than you might think from Genesis is the story that is so central to the Enoch literature, the marriage between angels and women. And this is based in part on Genesis 6:1-4, you know, when the sons of God married the daughters of men and had gigantic children and so on. And we know how in the book of Enoch, this is interpreted as the sons of God are God's angels who look down from heaven, see these beautiful women, desire them, and come down and marry them and have gigantic children. Well, Jubilees explains that story just very much like the book of Enoch does. And in fact, it seems quite likely that Jubilees used the book of Enoch, that the writer knew that book and reproduced some material from it. All of this may have something to do with the question of, was God justified in sending a flood? You could, from Genesis, you might wonder, why did God send a flood? What went so wrong? We learn in Genesis before the flood story that the earth had become corrupt and everything people did was wrong and so on. But if you look at the previous chapters in Genesis, there are a few sins mentioned, but not much. And you wouldn't think you need a flood to respond to just a few sins. But this story about angels introducing a superhuman power to sinful forces and so on, and unleashing sinful forces, this for many people supplied a more convincing explanation of the flood, for why God sent it.
Yeah. There is something there. As you're drinking now, I want to take advantage of that. Something that really caught my attention as well is the fact that in the book of Jubilees, the watchers, these angels, the book of Jubilees portrayed them as they were sent with a mission to, right? To be some sort of like a civilization's hero, something like that.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they are even called the gardeners. Like they are taking care of the cosmos and everything. They go down here. And it's until happens what we already know what happened, and everything literally went to hell. But that's something that really caught my attention, because originally they are the good guys. I mean, they are sent with a good purpose.
To
teach the peoples, right?
That's exactly right. They are. This is an unusual feature in Jubilees. It's different than what we find in Enoch. The angels were sent by God to the earth to teach people what is right. And I think maybe the reason why the author understood it that way was that, according to the Enoch version of the angels, they conceived their plan in heaven. They're looking down from heaven, and they decide to sin and go down to the earth. Jubilees, I think, it wants to defend heaven's reputation, that it's not a place of evil, that evil doesn't come from heaven, but God sent these angels for a good purpose. And then when they're on earth, they see the daughters of men, and then, as you said, all hell breaks loose as a result of this. So Jubilees may be trying to correct the Enoch tradition a bit in that particular story as well. But again, it helps to explain why God took the drastic step of sending a flood upon the earth. If I could mention something else here. One of the concerns of the author of Jubilees, as I hinted earlier, is to burnish the reputation of his characters, of his heroes. I mentioned Abraham's lies twice about the identity of his wife. Is she his wife, or is she his sister? And we find some concern already in Genesis to try to defend Abraham here, because we get the notion that she actually was a sister of his, but they shared a parent. But I think this is in Genesis 20, where Abraham for the second time says she's his sister. But this is bothersome. Abraham does this twice, and Isaac, his son, also does this about his wife Rebecca, and lies about her too, and she's definitely not his sister. So Jubilees does attempt to help Abraham out a bit. It really glosses, it skips over, it presents the story in Genesis 12 a little differently, and also it skips the second instance of Abraham's lying about her identity. So, it wants to make Abraham look better. And we also know that according to the book of Joshua, toward the end of Joshua, that when Joshua is speaking to the people, he talks about how their ancestors worshipped idols across the river.
Yeah.
And these ancestors, he mentions them there, and it's in the chosen family that led to, in the genealogy, to Israel. So how could this be? Well, Jubilees has a story about Abram as a boy. When his father Terah is a priest of an idol in a temple in Babylon, in Ur, as the Bible says. And Abraham starts questioning his father about this. You know, why do we worship? Why do you serve this idol? It's just a dead thing and can't do anything, doesn't save you, and there's really a true God, and so on. And eventually, Abram burns down the idol temple, and of course, the idol can't defend himself; he just gets burned up. And actually, Abraham's brother does too in this conflagration. But Abram already is shown here to be a non-idol worshiper. As a child already, he was arguing against this, that his ancestors had practiced on the other side of the Euphrates River. One other one I'll mention.
Sure.
Jacob, as I said, is a hero of our author, and Jacob is a questionable character in Genesis. He's got his problems. He's presented as shifty. He's giving his brother a hard time. He gets the birthright from his brother, by giving him some food when he's hungry. But the worst scene for Jacob is, of course, when Isaac is going to bless Esau and sends Esau off to hunt to get him game and fix it up the way he likes it, and then he'll give him the blessing. And we know how Rebecca gets Jacob to intervene here and pretend he's Esau and steal the blessing. And in Genesis, when Isaac says to the disguised Jacob, "Who are you, my son?" He says, "I'm Esau, your firstborn." Well, in Jubilees, when it's retelling this story, Jacob just says, when Isaac asks, "Who are you?" he says, "I'm your son," which is true. He's not lying. He just says, "I'm your son." And his father feels him and he's hairy, so he must be Esau, and so on. So that one's a pretty blatant one, but it's an attempt to make Jacob look better than he looks in Genesis. This great patriarch, the ancestor of Israel, you'd like to have him looking his best. So and actually at the end of the later on in Jubilees, we know about conflict between Jacob and Esau. According to Jubilees, and this story is retold in other texts, Jacob and Esau ended up fighting a war against each other. It was started by Esau's sons, and Jacob's sons responded only when their father allowed them to. And Jacob actually ends up shooting Esau with an arrow and killing him. This story is one of the few places where we have a story in Jubilees that it also shows up in Midrashim.
Yeah, about the arrow there. Seems like David is not the only one who's getting arrows thrown at him.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. VanderKam, before we go to the third question, we're going to take a break.
Okay.
And I need to ask you, are you familiar? This is a rhetorical question. Are you familiar with the Enoch seminar?
I am.
Okay. So you're going to love this one. Okay.
Okay.
So here we go. Okay.
I
For those
attended
who,
many of the early meetings of the Enoch seminar.
yeah, I know. You were there. Yes, for those who don't know, Dr. VanderKam, he's a member of Enoch Seminar. The reason I'm showing these is because we are trying to, I mean, part of doing these interviews is to bring the scholars, but also to translate it or put it in the language, Spanish in this case, so that people who has the barrier, the language barrier, they can have this content available. So we are trying to create. We have the YouTube Enoch Seminar in Spanish YouTube. So my job pretty much is to put that content out there, and it's a lot of work. So with the supportive of Gabriele Boccaccini, who is the director and founder, I proposed that idea, and he said, "Go ahead, do it."
Yeah.
Yeah, very straightforward, man. So yeah, and you are not the first Enoch seminar member. I had also Mark Nanos, Jason Staples, Gabriele Boccaccini himself. He was in the podcast. He's actually coming to the podcast on May 8th with Giulio Mariotti, because they already published a new book on Paul.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have both of those two guys.
Good.
And yeah, so I also someone who I'm pretty sure you are familiar and you have a great affection for, Dr. John J. Collins.
Yes.
And Joshua was with me co-hosting, doing that interview with the great and only John J. Collins. And he's also returning. I think at the beginning of the fall, because he already published his 4th edition of the Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. So we're gonna be talking about that. So, Dr. VanderKam, with you here, having you here is just another member, and glad to put your content into Spanish as well. Okay, let's continue with the question. I have someone here who sent a message. I think it is it's a good friend. Saludos a todos, Marv, Jesus, Professor James. Gracias, James. Tora en el Jardín podcast. I know him from Luis Jovel's channel. Thank you for coming by and saying hello. So the third question, Dr. VanderKam, will be this one. This is getting good because, my mentor used to say, when it comes to spiritual beings, the watchers, angels, gods, demons, that's good for entertainment.
Yeah.
So before I can hit the third question, again, Joshua, any comments so far?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, not strictly about this question is very interesting. It's because probably Dr. VanderKam don't know. I do teach in Spanish in the Escuela de Alexandria. I'm the teacher of divinity, so obviously everything in my area is related to the divine council and gods and stuff. So I really like this topic. But what I was about to say before was like I'm very happy that Marv is pushing people to go to scholarship in this area, because in the Spanish world, sadly, the people still not too open to, for example, apocryphal books, another points of view, another perspective. So it's good to know that the people is now realizing the importance of this. Actually, the most complete works in apocryphal books is this 7 over there. They was just published, the last one last year. And it have like 20-30 years. That's Apócrifos del Antiguo Testamento of the Dr. Díaz Macho and Antonio Piñero. So obviously it's a long work, but it's very new. It's very new. So I'm very happy that this.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Matthias, any comments so far?
No comments so far. It was very interesting explanation.
Matthias is the guy who is waiting for the punchline, just to give the great question.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go with the third question here, Dr. VanderKam. So who's Mastema, and what role does he play in the grand scheme of Jubilees? Is it correct to assume that he is Satan from the New Testament?
Yeah, good question. So Mastema, as I mentioned a little while ago in talking about the sacrifice of Isaac, Mastema is the leader of the evil spirits, the leader of the forces of evil in the book of Jubilees. He's a really interesting character. And it seems like the writer, as I also mentioned, has in mind the picture in the book of Job of the Satan coming before God and his council and raising negative questions about Job. The name Mastema seems like it may be related to the word Satan, for Satan, in some way. At any rate, he's a deceiver. He appears in the book of Jubilees, but he does not appear until about chapter 10 or so, when after the flood, we find the rise of civilization and all sorts of negative aspects of it presented in the book of Jubilees. And it says that it was Mastema and his spirits that were causing all of this kind of trouble. And he is someone who obviously speaks with God as he does at the time of the sacrifice of Isaac. But an interesting story about him in Jubilees that we do not find in Genesis has to do with a time when Noah's descendants come to him and say and complain that evil spirits are leading his descendants astray, and what can be done about that. And God asked Noah asked God to destroy them so that they won't be misleading his descendants. And then Mastema shows up, and he says to God, look, I was sent to do these sorts of negative things. Leave me a tenth of, if you destroy all my evil spirit subjects, how am I going to carry out my evil mission? So leave me with a tenth of them so that I can do these bad things. So God says, oh, sure. We'll get rid of 90% of these evil spirits and we'll leave you with 10% of them. Very strange thing that God would allow this, but it is an attempt to explain, why there is evil after the flood when the negative forces have been destroyed. So Mastema comes along at that point when the evil spirits are present in the book of Jubilees after the flood. And he really doesn't show up that often in Jubilees. We read about him in the early stories about Abram. When Abram is just a boy, Mastema sends ravens to devour the seeds that the Babylonians throw out on the ground, and that ruins their chance for a crop. But Abram, a little boy, Abram, shouts so loudly at them that he drives the ravens away, and the crop is saved. But Abram is presented there as inventing a kind of plow that allows you to hide the seed under the soil where the birds can't get at it. Well, he shows up there. He shows up in the story about the sacrifice of Isaac. And then he shows up in the story about the Exodus from Egypt, where Mastema is apparently he's the one behind the plagues, or he's the one who's urging the Pharaoh to withstand and urging the Egyptians to withstand the Israelites and sending them charging after the Israelites when they leave and so on. So once again, he is defeated here, but God does permit him and his angels to do some things for a while, but he also binds them at the time when the Israelites leave Egypt. So maybe he is the kind of Satan figure that we find in the New Testament. As I mentioned, he doesn't appear too often in the book of Jubilees, but he is in contact with God. And he's obviously the leader of the forces of evil. So there certainly are resemblances between them. His power is limited. God controls him. There's no doubt about that, but he leads people astray.
Yeah, definitely. The way my mentor described mastermind, he said, "Well, this is a Satan figure," but
Mhm.
he never said is the Satan,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, it's an interesting character. I mean, he's given what the 10th percent of demons,
Yes.
the lot.
Yeah.
Um, Mastema appears in the Akedah, the episode with Isaac.
Yeah.
Actually, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. VanderKam, but in the Book of Jubilees, it is actually Mastema who is the blame put on for the almost sacrifice of Isaac, not
Yeah.
God.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
would you say this is something on the part of the author trying to justify God? Okay, hold on, this wasn't God. Don't freak out.
Yeah.
uh, just like just like the incident in David in the census,
Mhm.
where we have two accounts in First Samuel, I think it is. I'm bad at you guys if you can't remember the chapter, but we got the same incident in two books, but different twists.
Mhm.
One is God who commanded David to do the census. The other was Satan,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I see as the author trying to justify God in this instance. Oh, by the way, I remember that I think it's in the Exodus where the episode that God came out to encounter Moses to kill him.
Mhm.
uh, in the Book of Jubilees, is not God, is Mastema, right?
It is. Yeah. Right. Right. So
So yeah,
it's all part of this, like you were saying, of defending God here. Like the author of
yeah.
Jubilees defends his main characters, he also defends God from what looked like very questionable actions on his part.
Okay, there's a question here from one of our viewers, Dr. VanderKam. He wants to know what's the publisher of your books. He would like to buy your books. He's from Guatemala. Hoorah!
Uh,
Guatemala rocks.
some, some of my books have been published by the Erdman's Publishing Company in Grand Rapids, Michigan,
Yeah.
and some of them by Fortress Press in
Yes.
Minneapolis, Minnesota. You're showing some others that were published by Brill in the Netherlands.
Yes.
So various people
Just
have
yeah,
published.
just to remind you, there are two books. They were translated into Spanish by Editorial Trota.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
okay, one is for Editorial Trota, the other one is Verbo Divino. So two publishers. They took these two books from there you have them, those two. So the first one, which is an introduction to early Judaism, that's a good one. I mean, I've read reviews like this is the best introduction to early Judaism in Spanish. So it's top notch scholarship. I'm not kidding. So uh, let me go with I wanted to say this. I forgot about it, but it came to my mind again here. Do you remember the incident in the Tower of Babel? Um, because I remember the Book of Jubilees had some interesting ingredients right there. For example, the "let us," that plural language. It is specifies in the Book of Jubilees that God is talking to his 70 angels, which is something that is not clear. It's not that clear in our Bibles.
Yeah.
It only goes like let us go
Right.
down and
Mhm.
confuse their languages and whatnot.
Mhm.
But the Book of Joel it's adding that little bit and saying no, he's talking to his divine counsel.
Yeah, that's right. Many people think that when God says in Genesis 1, let us make man in our image and so on, that he's talking to his divine counsel, that let us make. But Jubilees is explicit about that in the case of the Tower of Babel, when God says, let's go down and confuse their language. He says, well, he's telling the angels of the presence and so on to do this sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
It just clarifies. It's like he's commenting on that passage and clarifying why the plural is used there.
Yeah, that's why I like the way you put it from the outset. The Book of Jubilees is more of a commentary on these two books.
I think it is, yes.
Okay, let's go with the fourth question. Almost there, because we want to respect and value Dr. Kam's time here. So let's go right there. So, what's Jubilees' view of the origin of evil? Do New Testament authors pick up this line of thought?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think very briefly that Jubilees does not deal with the question of the ultimate origin of evil. Where does it finally come from? Maybe we can say the author assumed there was evil present from the beginning. I don't know. Maybe he did, but he's not explicit about it. The story of the first people, Adam and Eve in the garden in the Book of Jubilees, is a little different than it is in Genesis. The Jubilees does not mention the command that God gave to the man. Don't eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In fact, the only hint of that is in the woman's answer to the serpent. When the serpent says, "Did God say you couldn't eat from any tree?" And then she explains, "Well, no, he didn't say that. He said we could eat from all of them except the one tree, and that we couldn't touch it." But they of course, it assumes that God gave the command. It's just not explicit in Jubilees as it is in Genesis. But I think an important thing in thinking about New Testament ideas is that there is no sign in Jubilees, I think, that the sin of Adam and Eve was understood to be an original sin in the sense that it influenced subsequent generations of people, made them inclined to sin. It's not like Paul's idea of, as in Adam all die, so in Christ will all be made alive. We don't have that in Jubilees. As nearly as I can tell, Jubilees talks about the disobedience of Adam and Eve, talks about Cain killing Abel, and a couple of other missteps, but it never says, well, all of that happened, Cain killing Abel and so on. All of that happened because of Adam's sin. So it's not an original sin. It's just the first sin, but it doesn't seem to change human nature. I think once we get to the story about the flood and the angels who came from heaven and then sinned and so on, and the evil spirits who came from the bodies of the giants and influenced people to do evil afterwards, we do have here a story that explains why it is that there's evil after the flood, why there's a lot of evil after the flood. So in that sense, that story provides a different framework. It's, okay, the whole situation is different now after the flood with these evil spirits being influential and causing people to commit sins. But I don't think Jubilees ever stops to ask the question, okay, Mastema, was he created? Where did he come from? Was he not created? It seems like he must have been, because God creates everything in Jubilees, but the author really doesn't say where he came from. And I think in that respect, it's like the book of Genesis. Genesis doesn't ask questions like that either. It just talks about a snake who misleads. How did that happen? Why did the snake get this idea? I think it could be that the authors of Genesis and Jubilees are just assuming, well, evil was there from the beginning. Sin is a factor from the beginning. So, it's quite different than Paul's notion of an original sin. And we find in some other Jewish texts, like 4th Ezra, more of a Pauline notion of an original sin. But also in Jewish texts, we find the idea that every person is responsible for his or her own sins.
Okay, thank you for that. So Joshua, they have your question ready? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I didn't brought it, but at least I think I can explain it. It's just about some phenomenon I found. I do have here the Jewish Annotated Apocrypha from Oxford of the new RSV, and I have the Spanish version. And I did realize, I don't know if this is a matter of just textual criticism of the Book of Jubilees, but I did realize something interesting on the plurals. It's quite obvious that on the older book, the first person speaking is the angel of the presence. But sometimes he switched to plural, speaking of he and his group. We understand those are 7. And my question is related to, and specifically parts of the creation or the first chapter of Genesis, it may look like it's trying to substitute the plurals of the Genesis 1 to 11. So my question is, this is an intent of the author to make clear that this is like a divine council worldview behind those plurals on the Genesis, or it's just like because I found in another translation it's just singular. It's just the angel speaking by himself.
Yeah,
that's my question.
Well, I think that it is the author's attempt to say that these are not just divine ways of referring to himself. God saying, "Let us." And he's referring just to himself. He's actually talking to angels, and that they are the ones who are closest to him, namely the ones that we call angels of the presence, angels of God's presence. That he's talking to them. I'm pretty sure that that's what our author is doing, trying to explain that plural, and also the plural in the Tower of Babel story, as Marv was pointing out.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I don't know if I can do the last one because it's connected to this one, and these are all mine.
Go ahead. Hit us without the second one.
Yes, my second one is the last, and it's very, very direct to this. I did realize something. Actually, I did realize with another apocryphal works, like, for example, the Revelation of Abraham, that it makes look like some special angels, they are trying to substitute the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament. So my question is this angel of the presence supposed to be a theophanic figures, or they are just a way to avoid the angel of the Lord problem? That's my last question. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah. I've looked through the cases where the angel of the Lord is referred to in Genesis, and in Exodus. Very interesting character as far as leading the Israelites in the wilderness. And in some cases, the angel of the Lord is the angel of the presence in Jubilees. Jubilees identifies that one as the angel of the presence. The story about the sacrifice of Isaac is one of those cases where he does. But he doesn't do it consistently. Sometimes when the angel of the Lord is mentioned in Genesis or Exodus, the angel of the presence in Jubilees doesn't do whatever that angel did. So there's some inconsistency in that regard. I thought probably the angel of the presence in Jubilees would take advantage of all these references and do all of these things that the angel of the Lord does in Genesis and Exodus, but I don't think he does. He does many other things, of course, like reading the book, revealing the book, but not all of the things the angel of the Lord does.
Okay. So Joshua,
thank you, Doctor.
You are well served. Okay, Matías.
Yes.
Okay, this is the moment, ma'am. You're
Okay.
building your momentum.
The expectation.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Dr. VanderKam, let me see if I can share screen.
Let me know if you can share your screen so we can go from there.
Okay, Dr. VanderKam, my question is actually the two questions, but they are very related, so it's one after the other. So let me check. Okay. Actually, window. Here it is.
Okay, in the meantime, as you are doing that, I need to ask you, Dr. VanderKam, something very quick. Who was your Ethiopic professor, Dr. VanderKam?
Thomas Lambden.
Okay, thank you.
Harvard University.
Okay, let me share the screen here. There you go. Matthias, go ahead.
I can see it. Okay. So, Dr. VanderKam, I was, my professor asked me to focus or recommend me to focus on the Book of the Luminaries in the Enochian corpus. And while I was reading the whole book, just to have the context, I was reading the end of the Book of the Watchers. And one part in chapter 18 that was very curious was in chapter 18, verse 14. When Enoch is in his cosmic travel, and he goes to a place in which he saw 7 mountains of fire. And he asked the angel what he was looking. And the angel said, "This is the place of the end of the heaven and earth. This has become a prison for the stars and the hosts of heaven. The stars that are rolling over the fire, these are they that transgressed the command of the Lord in the beginning of their rising, for they did not come out to their appointed times." So the thing is that the commentaries say that there is a relationship between those 7 mountains / stars that are in prison and the rebellion of the Watchers. However, in the text, it seems that they are like in a separated prison, like they are another category of rebels, and these are 7, not 200 or 20, like the 20 chiefs of the Watchers. So when I read those texts, it seems to me that is Enoch saying that God is angry with the 7 known planets in the ancient world, like the 5 planets plus the sun and the moon, because they don't follow the celestial North Pole. Why is that? Because the Book of the Luminaries seems to say that God is basically happy with how the stars move because they follow the command of the Lord. Here it seems that he is angry with 7 stars because they don't move with the rest of the stars. So it seems like there's a contradiction in the text. I have been looking for commentaries, and they seems to just saying, "Oh, those are Watchers," but it seems that the text separate the 2 categories. The rebel stars and the rebel Watchers seems to be 2 groups. So I don't know if you have any comments about that.
Well, that these 7 stars would have anything to do with the planets, I'm not so sure about that. It could be, but clearly the fault of these stars is that they disobeyed the creation commandment about when they were to rise, their appointed times, and we know how important the appointed times are in Enoch and in Jubilees as well. That the whole calendar and the chronology and so on depends on this sort of thing. It sounds like their punishment about their being bound until the time of the consummation of their sins, 10,000 years. It sounds like that's similar to what happened to the Watchers, although, of course, as we know, there were many more Watchers who came down according to the Enoch tradition. So at least I'd like to raise the question, are these stars that are mentioned here planets? Why should we think they're planets? Do we have good indication in the text? And I'm just offhand, I'm not remembering that they were identified in some way that we would think they were the planets. Perhaps you have a response to that.
Well, that's the only thing I could think was planets, because the planets means wanderer, because they are the only objects in heaven that they don't move with the rest of the fixed, quote unquote, fixed stars around the celestial North Pole.
Right.
Now those are seven, and the text say that those are stars. The problem is that we have in the Enochian corpus the whole book of the luminaries that basically say that the sun and the moon, they are fine. So, and the sun and the moon were considered to be planets in the ancient world, and because the planets move through the ecliptic. So that's the thing. I was reading commentaries, and they say, oh yeah, those are watchers. But the text here seems to separate it, because there is a prison for the watchers and there is a prison for the stars. So and since my whole thing is astronomical stuff, I was like, who are those guys?
Yeah, so they're already being punished here, isn't it? They're rolling over in the fire. They're being punished at this point, but I don't know. I can understand why one would want to say this refers to the planets and their irregular times compared to sun and moon, but I'm not so sure about the identification.
Yeah. Yes. Also, well, the sun and the moon, because I think those are seven. In the ancient world, they knew about 5 planets, up to Saturn, because beyond Saturn they didn't know anything, because it's not the rest of the planets are not visible without a telescope. The thing is that the sun and the moon, their cycle seems to be like the Book of Enoch and the Enochian corpus say that's okay, that's good. Yes, but the planets, they have the curiosity that from the point of view of the Earth, they wander. They sometimes advance, and then they stop, and then go back. So they look like they are like doing their own thing. Like they are not like the rest of, but those will be 5, not 7. So that's why I asked, because the planets doesn't fit perfectly the explanation with the explain.
Well, I guess I would be surprised if in Enoch's astronomy, something like the planets would be condemned in this way, when, as you pointed out, it seems as though the stars, according to the astronomical book, are just fine. God has assigned them their paths, but maybe that's right. Maybe they are the planets. I don't know. You're correct, about the meaning of the word planet, and these are the ones who transgressed. But that's in one book, the Travels of Enoch, and the whole Book of the Watchers, of course, are from one particular tradition. It's a separate document, a separate work from the astronomical Book of Enoch. So I guess we wouldn't have to assume they would agree on everything.
That's true, and that's related to my second question, which is, it's so similar that I wanted to go to the first one. At the end of the book of the luminaries, the whole book seems to talk about how regular everything is in heaven, basically all the cycles, everything. And at the end of the book, there in chapter 80, there is this text that talks about an eschatological future. It said, many heads of the stars will stray from their command, which sounds like the end of the book of the Watchers, and will change their ways and actions, and will not appear at the times prescribed to them. The entire law of the stars will be close to the sinners, and the thought of those on earth will err regarding them. And my question is related to this. They will turn back from all their ways, will err, and will take them to be gods. So this, the thing is, the whole passage seems to say that in the eschatological future, the regularity of the book of luminaries is going to break, and the stars are going to err again, or at least from this point of view, from the point of view of the book, they are going to start to err. The question is, it says, they will turn back all their ways and they will take them to be gods, which is kind of strange because apart from even in Israel, if Israel considered to be the star divine beings as part of God's divine council, everybody in the ancient world thought that the stars were gods. So why it seems to be like why is this new if that's happening all the time?
Okay. Well, just some thoughts about that. I, in my commentary on the Book of the Luminaries, suggested that this 80th chapter does not really belong to the book, of the Luminaries, because of this very sort of thing about the breakdown in the natural order. Whereas at the beginning of the Book of the Luminaries, in chapter 72, really at the beginning of chapter 72, it seems as though this regularity of nature is going to last forever. And then chapter 80 comes along and says it's going to be, they'll change their courses and so on. And I think in that the text, both the Book of the Luminaries and this chapter 80 are Jewish texts that are directed to Jewish audiences. Probably the idea of taking the stars to be gods is directed to Jews, for whom one wouldn't normally think this was what they thought. Anyway, I thought that the 80th chapter really did not fit in with the thought of the rest of the Book of Luminaries.
Yes, it's an editorial addition to make the Book of the Luminaries in sync or in harmony with the rest of the Enochian corpus. Because,
yes, that is right.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that the editorial edition in chapter 80 seems to do the whole thing eschatologically, which is kind of funny because the Book of Watchers is something that's in the past.
Yes.
So
right.
it's very interesting.
It is interesting. Right.
Any comments about that? Why it decided to do it eschatologically? Because it could perfectly have done like for example, in the book of the Wisdom of Ben Sira, in which the Watchers and the Giants are mentioned, but is talk about that done deal that happened in the past.
Yeah,
forget about it.
Right. So again, I think that actually what chapter 80 is talking about here is, of course, the future, and it's not talking, I think, about watchers here, about that sort of thing, but really, as we both mentioned now, the breakdown of the natural order that's going to occur at some point, is predicted to occur at some point. So I take this to be a different kind of tradition than what we have in the stories about the Watchers.
Yeah, so not like, for example, some conspiracy people in the evangelical world, they say that in the future the Watchers, the Nephilim are going to return, and maybe they're going to use that. Yeah. That's yes. As final comments, reading this text, one or two texts that from the Hebrew Bible that seems to resonate is Psalm 19. It talks about how the regularity of the cosmos talks about the glory of God, and how the law, and in Psalm 19 is very beautiful how it puts the regularity of the cosmos, talking about how great God is, and then the law, how it's necessary for humans to align with the regularity of the cosmos. It's like cosmos work as God's spokesperson, and the law is necessary so we can sync with their harmony. So it seems that that's why the Book of the Luminaries and Ben Sira go to astronomy to talk about that, how it shows God's glory and order, and how we have to align ourselves with that. So
that's right. And the early in the Book of Watchers, the first chapters of the Book of Watchers, where also the regularity of nature is being talked about, and then human conduct is contrasted with that. Humans are not do not obey God's laws like natural phenomena like sun.
It talks about in the end of the Book of the Luminaries about in the days of the sinners, and that's the thing, that human sin can actually break the cosmos. That's kind of like an idea,
right?
And that's very interesting how the vision of humanity, it seems to be very elevated, that God actually gives humans the ability to uphold the cosmos through, following the law, and also to break it if we screw up.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. And the last comment, sorry, is in the Song of Deborah, which is a very, very, very old tradition. It's about the battle with Sisera. He said in verse 20 in the Songs of Deborah, "From the heavens the stars fought, from their courses they fought against Sisera." We know from the story that no stars descended from heaven and fought against Sisera's armies, but the idea that the whole movement of the cosmos can affect what's happening on Earth, that's a very, very old tradition. It seems to be probably the inspiration for those ideas. I think that's...
Yes. Right. Good point. Thank you, Matthias.
Thanks, Dr. VanderKam.
Okay, Matthias, you did, my man. As I said from the outset, this interview doesn't do justice. We got a lot of questions, but we're coming to an end. Before I pass it to Joshua, I want to show you something regarding the last question and comment that Matthias was doing. There is a book, Matthias, and people listening, who addresses kind of the same questions that Matthias was posing to Dr. VanderKam. It's published in the Orbis Biblicus et Orientalis series. So it's Yahweh Fighting from Heaven. I recommend that. Matthias, if you can get it, go ahead. And I hope it can give you some answers to your overall questions right there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, my pleasure. Joshua, hit us with your comment or question, and we're closing to provide the final comments here.
Yeah. Thank you. Amazing. I mean, it was very interesting, the question of Matthias. My question is not theological in this time. I just giving a break to the Professor James, Dr. James. It's about your books are few were translated into Spanish, but my question is regarding to, we already have in Spanish the textos de Qumran from Florentino Garcia Martinez. That's the most complete Spanish translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I'm still wondering if maybe maybe you're working on it, or maybe it's coming, more complete textual criticism translation into Spanish of the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you know something about it, is the plans to coming? I don't know, because I believe this is very good, but if I compare with new works, I did realize that it's quite obsolete. So we're still looking for something new in the future.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of projects like that going on. As you mentioned, some of my books have been translated into Spanish. I find out about this. I don't know why people choose to translate them or who translates them, but I'm happy that they do. But I'm not aware of projects like that might be underway, translating, the Dead Sea Scrolls completely and in an up-to-date way into Spanish. I hope there is. I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for it, and I know that you have a textual, a version of the Book of Jubilees. So it will be interesting, actually, if at least just that one, because this collection of the apocryphal book is very good. But I'm still waiting to the apocryphal books come a little more scholarship in Spanish, and that's why I'm asking this question. But thanks a lot. And hope someone else start making interesting in translating your work without your permission.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need, if I might butt in here, we need to, there's a lot of work to do in other languages, not only Spanish, but that's why scholarship, it's mandatory. I mean, it's a must, a big must to support. And the best way you can do it is buying their books. Okay. not the other way around, which is the mischievous way. You know what I mean. I won't get into details. Okay. If you want to support scholars' work, buy their books. Okay, and that will keep them going. I have a question here, and we're
what I
going to
meant,
conclude with this
just
one.
to make
Yes.
clear, what I meant when I'm saying the without your permission, it means to without asking you, hey, we can translate this. Just doctor, we plan to translate this straight away. Okay.
Oh no,
But
no worries.
obviously, the books have to be taken by them, looking for
Yeah,
them.
no worries. My comment is not doesn't have to do with your question or comment. I'm saying overall, because that's the best way to support scholars' work, to buy their books. So
Yeah.
yeah, and the other thing is, because if you want to, I mean, Dr. VanderKam, he knows better than us to translate one book into another language. There's a lot of rights discussion. Is not something easy. Okay, so also publishers, they are making sure, because this is a business,
Yes.
and they are making sure that that book will hit the sales as expected.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of really serious decisions that they need to make as a businessman.
That's right.
So we hope, I'm with Joshua, we hope that that possibility really materialize, and we can have not only Dr. VanderKam, but I mean, many people out there, we can have their scholarship translated into Spanish, because it's top notch. So I'm with you in there. Okay, this is the last question from the audience, Dr. VanderKam, and we're going to conclude. Okay, so Aitor Navarro says, question: are there any early church fathers which cited the Book of Jubilees as a scripture, i.e., like Book of Enoch was cited as a scripture by Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and others?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of people who referred to the Book of Jubilees. It's more difficult to find any reference to Jubilees as scripture in early Christian texts, more difficult than to find references to Enoch's writings as scriptural. We certainly have some of those. But Epiphanius, the bishop of Salamis on Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, does cite Jubilees a few times, and seems to treat it as rather an authoritative source. I mentioned that he cites the translation material in Jubilees in his work on weights and measures, and he also refers to other material in Jubilees. So he seems to attribute authority to it. But there really are no nice, clear statements that I'm aware of, such as we find for the Book of Enoch in Tertullian or someone like that.
All right. Thank you, Dr. VanderKam. Okay, guys, this is the end. First, I'm going to say personally, Dr. VanderKam, thank you so much for your time for this interview. I enjoyed it. I have fun. Joshua, Matias, I will go with Joshua first. Final comments.
I mean, this is my world. I really like to meet scholars who have been giving so much to the Christian world, because we understand that we need to have access to these texts, and it's important to someone to actually have the will to translate them, explain them, and talks about them. So I'm really happy, Dr. VanderKam, first to meet you face to face at least, and second, because I know that this is just the superficial line of many things, and it's interesting. Apart from, I grew up, I don't know why, but I grew up really closer to apocryphal books, or at least curious to them, and it's nice to find other Christians who actually have the same what was the name, the same approach. It's like, oh yes, I start, because the Bible give questions, and these kind of books, at least for example Jubilees, is those questions in the Jewish mind of the Second Temple times. Right. So I'm really happy for that. I really thanks for your work. I know you have been a lot. God bless your life, and obviously I will aware to any news of Spanish works of your books. Okay.
Right. Thank you.
All right, Matias, you go. You're up next.
Okay, final comments. Thank you, Dr. VanderKam, for your time, for bringing this material to the wider public, because there is an important division between what the average Christian know and what the average academic knows, and that's actually something very regrettable. But the good thing is that now more and more material is reaching the public. So it's great to meet and to interact with academics that are putting that effort to bring the world of the Bible and the world of the biblical writers to the average reader. That will be all. And what else? Oh yeah, with respect to my last question, so I have to keep digging to see if there is more resources related to those 7 stars or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, me personally, I'm enthralled. I mean, and I'm going to say, Dr. VanderKam, the same thing I said, Dr. John J. Collins. I wish you guys could live that ages of the patriarchs, many years, so we can enjoy about your scholarship.
Thank you.
But we want to take advantage of the time you're with us. Okay, Dr. VanderKam, I just want to tell you, this is a platform for you, scholars, where you can, this is a platform where we can agree and disagree. And at the end of the day, we're still friends. And I can get you out for a cup of tea or coffee. So thank you so much for coming to the show. I enjoyed it, guys. I think you also, I hope you also enjoyed it. And I hope this is not the last time that we can have Professor VanderKam here with us, taking advantage of his scholarship. So as I remind you, people out there, remember, future interviews, Helen K. Bond from the University of Edinburgh is coming to the show to talk about the book, the first biography of Jesus. Who wants to know about that? I want. So she's coming. Also, Robin Faith Walsh, she's coming to talk about the origins of the New Testament in its Greco-Roman literary culture. So keep an eye on that, please. Keep an eye on that. And we have also another scholars coming to the show to talk about their scholarship. So please keep that in your schedules. So again, thank you, Professor VanderKam. Anyone wants to say
thank
something?
you for the good questions.
Oh yeah.
Important. Now that you mentioned Edinburgh, Dr. VanderKam, are you planning to go to Edinburgh at some point?
I spent 1 year in St. Andrews near Edinburgh, but I'm not planning to go there.
Sadly. Yeah. I will be there in July, probably next.
Unless you want to pay his ticket.
I'm going to the United States. I mean, it will be more easy to go to the United States, but it's huge. At least Edinburgh, Scotland is quite smaller.
Yeah. Dr. VanderKam, before I let you go, do you have anything in the pipeline? Any writing project, article, something like that, that we should be aware of?
I've recently completed a manuscript, which is a study of the Second Temple, the temple itself, the temple building and what people said about it, talking about the Second Temple that's before Herod's temple, the one that was built after the exile and was destroyed in 20 BC. So study of that.
It's coming out with who?
I haven't made arrangements yet.
Okay, thank you. So we're gonna keep an eye on that. We're gonna keep an eye on that when it's come out. Yeah, definitely. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for your attention. People in the audience, thank you so much for your questions, and thank you for being here. Just to remind you, we have the Enoch Seminar YouTube channel. It's just newborn. Okay, for those who might be asking about why we haven't still uploaded some other videos, we're still working on that. It's a lot of work. Okay, so please be patient. We're gonna be uploading as much as content as we can. Okay, so keep an eye on that. With that in mind, everybody, bye now. Take care. Until the next time.